They mocked her, forced her to play. But when the first note rang out, the crowd froze, because nobody expected the frail old woman to be a violin virtuoso. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The busy downtown plaza buzzed with weekend activity as shoppers and tourists moved through the space. In one corner, a small crowd had begun to gather around a makeshift stage, drawn by the commotion of several young men in their 20s who were hosting some kind of impromptu street event. Their loud laughter and boisterous behavior attracted more onlookers by the minute. Among the crowd stood Eleanor Winters, a slender woman in her 70s, wearing a faded blue coat and carrying a worn leather bag. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and though her posture was slightly stooped with age, there was a quiet dignity in her bearing. She stopped to observe the scene, curious about what was happening. Jason Martinez, the ringleader of the group on stage, spotted Eleanor and nudged his friend. "Look at the old lady," he snickered, pointing toward her. "I bet we could have some fun with her." His friends laughed in agreement, completely unaware of who they were about to encounter. "Hey, Grandma!" Jason called out, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Come join us up here! We need a volunteer!" The crowd parted as all eyes turned toward Eleanor, who stood frozen in surprise. Eleanor hesitated, clutching her bag tighter as the young men continued to call her forward. Some in the crowd looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. With reluctance, she slowly made her way toward the stage, her steps measured and careful. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jason announced theatrically as Eleanor climbed the 2 steps to the platform. "Today we have a special guest." He dramatically gestured toward Eleanor, who stood awkwardly before the gathering crowd. The flush of embarrassment was evident on her weathered face. Jason's friend, Tyler, emerged with a battered violin they had brought as a prop for their street performance. "We're going to see if Grandma here remembers how to play," he announced, thrusting the instrument toward Eleanor. The crowd murmured, some laughing nervously while others looked away in discomfort. Eleanor stared at the violin, her hands trembling slightly. "I haven't played in many years," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the plaza noise. But Jason and his friends insisted, making exaggerated gestures of encouragement that were clearly meant to mock her. "Come on, show us what you've got," Jason pressed, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Unless you're too old to remember how?" His friends laughed, and Eleanor's shoulders slumped further under the weight of their ridicule. With a deep breath, Eleanor took the violin from Tyler's hands. She examined it briefly, adjusting the strings with surprising familiarity. The young men exchanged amused glances, expecting an awkward, screeching performance they could laugh about later. "This instrument is badly out of tune," Eleanor remarked, her voice suddenly steadier as her fingers moved expertly across the violin. The young men's smiles faltered slightly as they watched her handle the instrument with unexpected confidence. Eleanor positioned the violin under her chin, closed her eyes briefly, and then drew the bow across the strings. The first note hung in the air, pure and perfect. Then came another and another, until the melody of Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons filled the plaza with its haunting beauty. The crowd fell silent. The mocking laughter died away. Even the constant background noise of the city seemed to fade as Eleanor played with the skill and passion of a true virtuoso. Her entire demeanor had changed. Her back straightened, her movements became fluid and graceful, and her face transformed with the joy of the music flowing through her. As Eleanor continued to play, drawing a growing crowd with each passing minute, a well-dressed man pushed his way to the front. He watched Eleanor with wide eyes, his expression a mixture of disbelief and recognition. "That's Eleanor Winters," he whispered to the person beside him, but his words spread quickly through the mesmerized audience. Eleanor Winters, the former concert violinist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Jason and his friends stood frozen. On the stage, their faces pale with realization and shame. They had unwittingly selected one of the most celebrated violinists of her generation for their cruel prank. A woman who had once performed in the greatest concert halls around the world before arthritis had forced her early retirement 20 years ago. Eleanor moved into the final movement of the piece, her eyes closed in concentration as her fingers danced across the strings with muscle memory that had never truly faded. When the final note echoed across the plaza, there was a moment of profound silence before the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she lowered the violin, overwhelmed by the reception and the feeling of performing again after so many years. The crowd continued to cheer, many recording the unexpected performance on their phones, videos that would soon go viral across social media. Jason approached Eleanor, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine contrition. "Ms. Winters, I'm so sorry. We had no idea who you were," he stammered, his voice thick with shame. Eleanor looked at him with kind eyes. "Perhaps that's the lesson here, young man. You never truly know the stories people carry within them." She handed him back the violin. "This instrument has potential, but it needs care." The well-dressed man who had recognized Eleanor stepped forward, introducing himself as the director of a local music school. "Ms. Winters, we would be honored if you would consider teaching a master class for our students. Your gift shouldn't remain silent any longer." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's impromptu performance became a catalyst for change. The video of her playing reached millions, inspiring countless viewers with the story of the humiliated elderly, woman who revealed herself to be a master musician. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Eleanor Winters stood before a class of 20 eager young violin students in the newly established Winter Scholarship Program at the Boston Conservatory. The spacious studio, flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows, had once been an underutilized storage room before the conservatory renovated it specifically for Eleanor's program. A portrait of Eleanor in her prime, performing with the Boston Symphony Orchestra in 1978, hung on the wall behind her, a gift from her former colleagues who had rediscovered their old friend through the viral video that had changed everything. "Position is everything," Eleanor explained, her voice carrying a newfound strength as she demonstrated the proper way to hold the violin. "Your instrument should feel like an extension of yourself." Her arthritic hands still troubled her, especially on cold mornings like today, but 6 months of regular playing had restored much of her former dexterity. Regular physical therapy, funded by her new health insurance, itself a benefit of her position at the conservatory, had worked wonders that she once thought impossible. The Winter Scholarship Program, funded by donations that had poured in, after her viral performance, now provided comprehensive musical education to 30 underprivileged children across Boston. The selection process had been rigorous but focused on passion rather than technical proficiency, a philosophy Eleanor had insisted upon. "We're looking for hunger," she had told the board. "Technical skill can be taught, but the hunger to learn must come from within." Among her most dedicated volunteers were Jason Martinez and his friends, who had turned their public shame into a genuine commitment to making amends. Jason, who had once been the ringleader of the cruel prank, now arrived early, 3 days a week to help set up the classroom, maintain the instruments, and assist the younger students with basic techniques. The transformation in the young man had been as remarkable as Eleanor's own journey. From an entitled college dropout seeking attention through public pranks, he had become a serious music education student with plans to teach in underserved communities after graduation. "Ms. Winters," Jason said, approaching her after class one afternoon, "we've confirmed 5 more community centers for the summer outreach program. We'll be able to reach another 100 kids with the introduction to Strings' workshops." His eyes, once filled with mocking laughter, now shone with purpose. The same charisma that had made him a natural leader for pranks now served him well as the coordinator of the program's community outreach. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Jason. And have you found enough volunteer instructors?" "Yes, ma'am. 15 of the advanced students from the conservatory have signed up, plus a few retired professionals who contacted us after the NPR story aired last week." The national media attention had been unexpected. What began as a viral social media moment had expanded into feature stories in major newspapers, a segment on 60 Minutes, and now regular updates in arts publications about the Violin Lady and her mission to bring classical music education to those who couldn't afford it. Eleanor had initially been uncomfortable with the spotlight, but she had come to recognize its value in advancing her cause. "Music lives within us even when we think it's gone," Eleanor told her students as she lifted her violin, a new Stradivarius replica gifted by a prestigious instrument maker from Italy who had seen her viral video and been moved to tears. "Sometimes it takes someone else to help us rediscover what we've lost." The gleaming instrument was far superior to both the battered violin from the plaza and the modest instrument she had owned during her retirement years. Its rich, resonant tone filled the studio as she demonstrated a particularly challenging passage from Bach's Partita No. 2. The students watched in rapt attention, many of them coming from neighborhoods where classical music education had been eliminated from schools due to budget cuts. For some, the only instruments they had ever seen before the program were in videos or distant orchestra pits during rare field trips. Now, each student had access to a quality instrument, either on loan or in some cases gifted permanently, to those showing exceptional dedication. Tyler Chen, another of the young men from the Plaza incident, now oversaw the instrument maintenance program, having discovered an unexpected talent for violin repair. Under the guidance of a master luthier who volunteered his expertise twice a month, Tyler had established a small workshop where damaged instruments donated to the program were lovingly restored and put into the hands of students who could not afford their own. "Ms. Winters, could you show us that fingering again?" asked Maria, a 12-year-old prodigy from South Boston whose single mother worked 3 jobs to keep their family afloat. Before the scholarship program, Maria's musical education had consisted of YouTube tutorials watched on a borrowed laptop at the public library. Now, she was preparing for her first public recital, showing promise that reminded many of Eleanor in her early years. Eleanor moved to Maria's side, gently adjusting the girl's fingers on the fingerboard. "Feel the pressure here, not here," she explained, her teaching style both demanding and nurturing. "The music is already inside you. Your fingers are just the conduit." In the adjacent studio, a string quartet composed of program students rehearsed for the upcoming fundraising gala. The annual event, to be held next month at Symphony Hall, had become one of Boston's most anticipated cultural gatherings. This year, Eleanor herself would perform as a special guest with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, marking her first appearance on that stage in over 2 decades. Dr. Reginald Thompson, the conservatory's director who had recognized Eleanor in the plaza that fateful day, poked his head into the studio. "Eleanor, the documentary crew is here for your interview. Shall I tell them you need more time with your students?" Eleanor nodded gratefully. "Another 15 minutes, please, Reggie. We're just getting to the heart of this passage." The documentary, produced by a major streaming service, aimed to chronicle not just Eleanor's unexpected return to music, but the ripple effects throughout the community. Interviews with students, parents, volunteers, and city officials painted a picture of how one moment of potential humiliation transformed into a movement that was changing the cultural landscape of Boston's underserved neighborhoods. The final irony was not lost on Eleanor. The cruel prank meant to humiliate her had instead returned her greatest joy to her life and created opportunities for hundreds of children who might never have experienced the transformative power of music education. As she drew her bow across the strings to demonstrate a technique to her students, she silently thanked the young men who had unknowingly brought music back into her world. Later that evening, after the documentary interview and a meeting with potential donors, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the plaza where it all began. The space had changed in subtle ways over the months. A small permanent stage now stood where the makeshift platform had been, part of the city's new initiative to promote public arts performances. Weekend concerts featuring students from the Winters program had become a regular fixture, drawing crowds that often exceeded those of the nearby street performers and buskers. A small bronze plaque now commemorated the spot of Eleanor's unexpected comeback performance. It read, "On this spot, on October 12, 2024, Eleanor Winters reminded the world that talent, dignity, and grace never truly fade away. May all who stand here find the courage to share their gifts." The mayor had unveiled the plaque in a ceremony 3 months earlier, with Jason and his friends standing respectfully beside Eleanor as the covering was removed. Eleanor sat on a bench facing the plaque, watching as the evening light cast long shadows across the plaza. A young woman approached, violin case in hand, and recognized Eleanor with a start. "Ms. Winters, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm Sophia. I'm in your Thursday advanced class." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Hello, Sophia. Are you planning to play here tonight?" The young woman nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness on her face. "I'm trying to get more comfortable performing in public. My audition for Juilliard is in 3 months, and I need to build my confidence." "A worthy goal," Eleanor said, patting the bench beside her. "I'll be your first audience member tonight." As Sophia began to set up, more students from the program appeared, having heard through their group chat that both Eleanor and Sophia would be at the plaza. Soon, an impromptu ensemble had formed, with Eleanor providing gentle guidance as they worked through pieces they had been studying. A crowd gathered, as it always did when music filled the plaza. Among the onlookers, Eleanor spotted an elderly man with a cane, watching with tears in his eyes. After the students finished a particularly moving rendition of Elgar's Salut d'Amour, he approached Eleanor. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You won't remember me, but I was at your final concert with the Boston Symphony back in 2003. I never thought I'd hear you play again." Eleanor smiled, recognition dawning. "Mr. Abernathy, front row, stage left. You always brought red roses." The high man's face lit up with astonishment. "You remember?" "A musician never forgets her devoted audience," Eleanor replied with a gentle smile. "Would you care to join us? We're having an impromptu masterclass." As Mr. Abernathy took a seat, Eleanor reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this moment. From isolation and forgotten talents to a new community and purpose that spanned generations. The legacy of that day in the plaza wasn't just about music. It was about connections restored, potential recognized, and second chances embraced. Eleanor stood and lifted her violin once more. "Students, let's show Mr. Abernathy and our plaza audience what the Winters program is all about, from the top of the Mendelssohn, if you please." As the first note soared into the evening air, Eleanor caught sight of Jason standing at the edge of the growing crowd, a look of pride and wonder on his face as he watched what his moment of cruelty had ultimately created. Their eyes met briefly, and Eleanor gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, not of forgiveness, which had been granted long ago, but of shared purpose in the continuing story they were writing together. The music swelled as the sun set over Boston, a fitting metaphor for the unexpected final movement in the symphony of Eleanor Winters's remarkable life. A movement that promised to resonate long after she was gone, in the hands and hearts of every student who carried her legacy forward.